a sudden he would take off. I was like, my gosh, what is going on? It was a 30-something. Had the home and had the big license plate on the side. He was so close to that.
Yeah, happy to be there.
We said something. Oh, stay away from me. Stay away from me. We were right behind you. Giving you one. I felt like I was the only one I was there with that guy. I said, he's just-
Oh. Okay. Interesting.
Me and Allison shared.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. We are glad that you're here with us this morning. It's always just a little unnerving to see myself on the screen. It's like looking in the mirror, and you're not really ready for it. Yeah, well, if I had them, they would be out of place. Thank you, Carla. See, I expected that from you. It was Michelle on Wednesday night that I didn't expect that from. She gave me one right as I got up and started talking about wind, and she said, "Yeah, do you have the wind blowing in your hair?"
It just means that, we hold a special.
There's love stabbed into my heart.
No, never.
I love it. I'm glad you guys are here this morning, and we want to jump back into our study here. And I do promise, once again, we're going to get to Revelation itself. But before we do that, we want to lay this strong foundation. We're going to talk about these passages, these chapters in Matthew today, and hopefully get through that. And then we'll have maybe one or two sessions to talk about interpretation. The fancy term is hermeneutics, and we can talk about what that means, but interpretation specifically of Revelation. And so that's where we'll go next before we get into the text itself. And so we still got a few more weeks before we jump into the text itself, but I think it's very important that we lay this groundwork. And for those who are catching things online, or maybe even going back and catching things online, I apologize. I'm going to try to get on our YouTube channel and do some sorting and grouping so that you can find those Revelation-related videos a little more easily. So I should just talk to the camera and tell you guys that. But that's the plan. If I can get some time carved out this week to do that, so that you can access those more easily. There's quite a few who've been asking about it and asking for links to those videos, and so we'll try to make those more available, easily findable in the near future. So if you got your Bible with you, and I hope you do, be heading for Matthew chapter 23. We ended last week, I should say. We talked a little bit about advantages and disadvantages of trying to lay this foundation in what does the Bible say in other places, what did the New Testament say in other places about eschatology, about the end times, about the outcomes of all things spiritual. And so basically the advantage of that is that those places in Scripture tend to be less flamboyant in nature. They're less fantastical, they're less poetic, And so, like sort of tied into symbolism and so forth. And so it's more concrete if we find places in the Gospels or in Paul's writings that give us some concrete piers that we can lay our foundation on. Then we can move on to Revelation and feel like, okay, we can fill in the gaps and handle some of the symbolic language, the apocalyptic language. So that's our hope and our goal through that. So here we go. We actually started back in Matthew 23. I think we read that last week. Little section of Jesus talking to the Pharisees. He's been pronouncing woes on the Pharisees, saying, whoa, slow down, you Pharisees. You guys have taken things the wrong direction. He says in Matthew 23, verse 32, fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape from being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that you may come so that you may come all the righteous blood, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So there's a key phrase there that he uses in Matthew 23 to say, there's some of these things that I'm prophesying in this moment right now about these prophets that he is going to send, and these things will happen in your generation. Okay? Then in chapter 24, verses 1 and 2, he talks about the temple destruction. Jesus left the temple and was going away. So he's leaving the temple, going away from the temple. When his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple has a large complex, many buildings. But he answered them, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So there's some indication, some prophecy from Jesus there that there's a time that will come when that temple itself will be torn down. So you have that prefacing what I think I told you last week is our hinge verse. Okay, this is a source verse that we have to keep coming back to and remind ourselves that in verse 3, they ask 3 questions. Verse 3 says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. So this is not one of those Sermon on the Mount public preaching conversations. This is sort of a private conversation with a group of followers, a group of disciples. They come to him privately saying, number 1, tell us when these things will be, what he's just said about these prophets coming and about the temple destruction happening. So when will these things be? And number 2, what will be the sign of your coming? Okay, so the second thing they want to know is, how do we know that you're coming back? And then number 3, what will be the sign of the end of the age? What is going to indicate that the end time has arrived? Okay, so he's trying to answer for them basically 3 questions. And I think I may have put this up last week as well. Oh yeah, there they are. When will all these things be? What will be the sign of his coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? Okay, and then I gave you this sort of general outline that he answers in this way. So let's try this. Let's keep reading, starting in verse 4 of chapter 24. And let's just do these a section at a time and try to take them off a piece at a time. So 24 says, and Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed. See that you are not alarmed. See that you are not alarmed. That's kind of important, okay, because when we start to talk about these things, that's one of the things we get very worked up about. And he knew that the disciples he was talking to in that moment, and they had even more reason to be alarmed than you and I do, because to them this is all brand new. This is stuff that Jesus has been alluding to but not making completely clear. And he's like, yeah, these things are going to happen. And you can sense how they would feel fearful almost immediately and have that sense of panic and alarm and anxiety. This is going to happen soon. We need to be ready. What are we going to do? Panic. Do not be alarmed. Okay? For this must take place. The word must makes me think essential. makes me think this has to happen. We cannot circumvent this. We can't go around this. This is already written into the tapestry of the world. This is part of God's overall plan and will. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. Okay, so if he's trying to answer that first question, when will these things be? The things that he's prophesied about the temple and about these prophets. So he's just mentioned, okay, I am the Christ. These are the false Christs that we mentioned maybe last week. Okay, so they're going to come, these wars and rumors of wars. And boy, I tell you what, wars and rumors of wars. Can you figure out a time in our history of the world where there hasn't been wars and rumors of wars? We're going to talk about peace in our sermon time, and that's one of my goals, is that someday we can experience that. But here we are in 2021, and do we have wars and rumors of wars in 2021? Do those exist? Yeah. So I don't know that there's been a time in the history of the world where that wasn't a possibility and present. And I don't know that that's what Jesus is getting at. I'm just saying that we need to acknowledge that that's a reality. Wars and rumors of wars, because of our human frailties and faults and the way we are, it's just going to be part of our existence. It's a reality. Sorry, Grover.
And remember that when Jesus uttered those words, there was Pax Romana.
Okay.
The peace of Rome was present.
Mm-hmm.
There were no wars or rumors of wars. And the thing is, these were signs. These were different. These were outstanding. He's saying these things are coming.
Yes.
Today, it's so commonplace.
Sure.
It has no significance being a sign.
Sure. Well, and also today we have the ease of communication, media. We have worldwide coverage at our fingertips at any moment, so we can know about a war or a rumor of a war across the world in a matter of seconds, whereas they didn't have that. So if they heard of a rumor of a war or an actual war, it came through the pipeline of probably Roman government, Roman media, and it would have taken a lot longer to get there. And so the Pax Romana is a Roman peace that Grover's referring to, and it's sort of interesting because it's kind of a governmentally instated peace. Because of the power of Rome and its conquering and its government, its new kind of government, the way that Rome did things in that time period, there was a sense of peace, a declared peace, because nobody wants to mess with the Romans. But I would argue that even in that time, wars and rumors of wars existed because there were insurrections, there were people revolting in multiple different areas of the world at that time, and revolting in small ways, in some ways that people never heard of. And so the overall point still stands that wars and rumors of wars are just a reality of who we are as human beings. But your point is well taken that in this time period, the part of the reason that this would stand out to them is supposedly they're under this Roman peace that exists, this Pax Romana. So, good thoughts. Okay, so let me keep reading then. Verse 7. Okay, so these things are going to happen, but that doesn't mean it's the end yet. These wars and rumors of wars, see that you're not alarmed. Verse 7, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That might be more to the point Grover was just pointing out there that, okay, if we do have a national war on a larger scale, that's going to be different. So nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Okay, so this is the start of something if we see these things. Then, verse 9, no, let me stop there. So we got warning of false prophets. Okay, and then we got warning of coming tribulation. So now, verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. What does that sound like? What's happening to this group of disciples that Jesus is speaking to right now? What's going to happen to them that he's telling them about? Persecuted. Persecuted. That's the word, right? Specifically persecuted to the point of death. We have hating. And this reminds me of what Peter says about when you are persecuted, make sure that you're being persecuted because you're doing what's right, because you're doing it in the name of Christ. As a Christian, be persecuted as a Christian. Let's see, we mentioned the Romans. Did any significant persecutions happen with the Romans, specifically against Christians? Oh, yeah. So there's some things that this might be tied to that are nearer than we tend to think of when we look at these passages. Verse 10. And then many will fall away. Fall away from what? Christianity, the faith, the church, the way, because that's kind of how they would have described it later on. And betray one another and hate one another. Do you suppose that there might be stories during this intense persecution that is alluded at here in Peter and some places in Paul's writings, that during this persecution time there might have been some folks, I'll reference a movie later when we get to it, but there might have been some folks who betrayed other Christians and gave them up to the Romans and other persecutors? Yeah? Do you suppose there may have been some hate that was generated in that situation? Certainly. And then verse 11, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. So that's been one of the key things in this first few verses is false prophets are going to come, people are going to become claiming to be the Christ, and there's going to be leading many astray, leading many astray, leading many astray. I think that's like 4 times already it said lead many astray. So what we need to be at least concerned about, maybe not alarmed, but concerned about is not so much that there's going to be wars, not so much that there's going to be persecution, but that during all of that, people might be led astray. People might fall away from the truth. So what should be our goal? What should be our aim, disciples of Christ listening to Jesus right now? He's forewarning them about things that might happen, but his point is not worry about the things that might happen to you physically, but what might happen spiritually. Isn't that interesting? That you might fall away from the faith. Verse 12, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. What happens when love grows cold? So that we mistrust. It's hard to get it going again. Yeah? What else? Think of any kind of relationship where love grows cold. It dies out. There's no flame. Like Grover said, it's hard to rekindle. There's separation. That's sort of the eventual outcome. When love grows cold, people pull away from each other. Think of a marriage relationship, think of family relationships, think of friendships where the love just isn't there anymore. And so why would you spend time with that person anymore? It's a powerful image for us. There's this love that's going to grow cold because of the increase of lawlessness. What is lawlessness that the Bible defines? What word, the 3-letter word that the Bible uses to define this lawlessness? Sin, right? It's sin. As sin increases because of our this chaos coming, because we're not, at this point, we're falling away. We're not paying attention to the important things, the spiritual things. We're all worried about what's going to happen physically. So much so that we start to pull away, fall away, and our love grows cold. And I think about Revelation, where we're kind of going eventually in the prophecies that Jesus speaks to the churches, the 7 churches, and one of them in particular had a love problem. They'd left their first love. And part of what he says to them is to go back to that first love. Your love's grown cold. Verse 13, but the one who endures to the end will be what? Saved. Saved. And I know that probably not every situation where you see the word saved in Scripture does it mean specifically, saved from sin and tied to the cross and tied to Jesus. But I kind of think maybe this one is. I think this is part of that. Not only saved from the tribulation, the struggle that's going on, but maybe saved in an eternal sense. And then it says in verse 14, and this gospel, what's the gospel? Good news. The good news of whom? Jesus. And Jesus is talking about, he's telegraphing this. This gospel that I've been talking about is still going to be preached, right? The gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed, that's the word preach, proclaimed, throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Interesting. Okay. So, again, I want you to understand very quickly that it is going to be very difficult for us to nail down specific time periods as we think of and measure time. Jesus is not intentionally, when he's telling the prophets, or the disciples here, he's not spending a whole lot of time saying, okay, on June 73rd, in the year 19,000, whatever. He doesn't give us specific dates. He doesn't give us those kinds of things. His concern is what? Spiritual well-being. And that the gospel be proclaimed throughout the whole world, despite persecution, wars and rumors of wars, false prophets, false Christs. His whole purpose is that despite all of that, the whole world at least has the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus proclaimed. The testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. Now, someone says a lot of people say a lot of things about a lot of stuff, okay? And this is one of those places where they say, okay, well then nothing's going to happen until we have literally made sure that every single person on earth has heard the specific hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, and they've made their choice on that. And I don't know that we can measure things that way. I think we're taking on a little too much to try to measure things that way. So let's try to keep this tied in. Grover.
There's a problem with translations. The phrase there talking about the whole world, the Greek word had a word cosmos.
Cosmos.
The globe. Mm-hmm. That's not the word used there. Mm-hmm. The word used there is oikomene, which means, the root word is oiko, which means house.
House.
To give a corollary, back when Joseph and Mary were going to Bethlehem to be enrolled in a census for the purpose of taxes.
They went back to their own home, their house,
and
household.
Caesar gave an edict that the oikomene should be enrolled in the tax. It was his empire. That's the same meaning that
Interesting.
should be applied there, and it's mistranslated and it confuses the fool out of everybody.
Yeah, it's a problematic, and you know, translation's difficult no matter what we're doing. So yes, the world. What do we think the world is talking about there? Certainly, what I'm getting at, and I think what Grover's getting at too, is it's not this understanding that we have of the cosmos. It's not this whole the universal. Everybody knows everything that we know. We're not waiting for that full fruition to happen before these things come. Bottom line is that's one of those things that I don't think we're going to understand completely. Go ahead.
That has opened the door to dispensationalism and everything else. That is a serious problem.
Yeah, well, and that's why we're doing this, right?
Amen.
So we're trying to figure things out. So let's spend some time doing that. Let's keep going. Let's see, verse 15. Okay, more stuff. Abomination of desolation. So verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. Where's the holy place?
Jerusalem, temple.
Yeah, it's Jerusalem. It's in the temple. Okay, so within the temple, notice that it says holy place. Was there another place that's even more holy? You got your holy place, and then you got your most holy place. Yeah, innermost. Right. So there's sort of, as you draw your diagram of the temple, you got your most holy place, and you got your Ark of the Covenant, and all these important symbols, for the Jewish community. And that's supposedly where the presence of God would come to rest, especially during the tabernacle wandering times, but even into the point where the temple is dedicated originally, presence of God comes to stay there. And you have the Ark with the mercy seat. Okay, so that's where you would come to plead for mercy. In that place. So that's the most holy place where God can reside. But then there's a holy place around that where some people are allowed, but not everybody's allowed. And then there's a further out, area in the temple. So most holy, to the holy place. It's interesting. There's a little parenthetical. Let the reader understand. So Matthew wants to step out for a minute from the story and get us to think as readers, not just about who Jesus is talking to right then and there, but who is reading this that Matthew is speaking to. So it's stepping outside. And then there's us. I don't know how much Matthew thought about us, but he thought about some readers. Okay. Then, verse 16, let those who are in Judea, then, meaning right then, those who are in Judea in a specific geographical region, flee to the mountaintops. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. Why? Why not do those things? Sorry? Don't need it, okay?
Emphasizing urgency.
Urgency. Okay, this is something that's coming quickly. You won't have time for this. You won't have time for worrying about your cloak. You won't have time for worrying about going to get something out of your house. You need to flee to the mountaintops, okay? Verse 19. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Yikes. Okay, so whatever this urgency and this imminent thing that's coming, there's no point in stopping to do the things you would normally do for those who cannot walk as quickly because they are carrying children in one way or another and dealing with children one way or another. You got to get out of there. Pick them up and run. Verse 20, pray. Is that a good thing to do? Pray. Even at this moment, even in this moment of urgency, pray. Can you pray while you're moving? Don't close your eyes, okay, while you're walking along praying. But as you're running down the road, pray in your mind. Pray that your flight, again, a flight invites the idea of speed. This is happening quickly. May not be in winter or on a Sabbath. Winter, because winter is just a tough time to be traveling and it's cold. And if you left your cloak and you couldn't bring it anyway, you're going to have some problems, yes. But then on the Sabbath, why is that an issue? Traveling and doing things on the Sabbath? Oh yeah, there's mileage limitations in the Sabbath law code. There's just certain distances you weren't allowed to travel because you needed to stay within that Sabbath day's journey. So yeah, can't do that. Jesus and his disciples ran into some issues with that. Okay, so he's saying you got to kind of disregard those things. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. Interesting how he kind of switches to the past tense there. It's kind of a funny thing. And if those days had not been cut short, see, he has been talking about something that's imminent and coming, but then suddenly switches in verse 22 to the, and if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. So this idea of this great tribulation apparently has a cutting short, an ending, but for the sake of the elect. Okay, the elect. So to elect someone is to what? Choose. Thank you. Yes. To choose. So for those who are chosen, okay, for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Reminds me of something, again, that Peter says, 2 Peter chapter 3, and we'll get to that passage as well, about his patience. It's not like some count slowness. He's just being patient with us, that all would come to repentance. He's wanting that to happen. Verse 23, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. If in this moment of flurry and flight and, fear, alarm happens, and someone starts saying things like this that they've already said, I'm the Christ, here's the Christ, look, do not believe it, for the false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders. We're going to be doing things that seem miraculous to us, so as to lead us astray, Many people will go astray. So we have that phrase again, if possible, even the elect, even those who are chosen. Well, if they're chosen, so this goes against the whole doctrine that you can be chosen and then you're in and then nothing else can happen to you, because even the chosen are some who could be potentially led away. So if that's Christians, then even Christians can be led astray, pulled away. Verse 25, see, I have told you beforehand. What is that emphasizing? This is a warning. You have foreknowledge now. Forewarned. Now, there's some phrase about being forewarned. So you can be prepared. You can be ready for this. Verse 26, so if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Don't go out there and look in the wilderness to try to find him. I'm sure there were people who did that at different points in time. And there are still people who do that and say, well, there's this guy who says he's the Christ, or he says that he's a prophet of God, and so we're going to ban to him. It's never happened around here. Look, he is in the wilderness. Do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So we have a picture there. Lightning coming from the east, shining as far as the west. You ever see lightning light up the sky at night? It's like for at least an instant there, it's like full illumination. So will be the coming of man. Do you know when that's going to happen, when that lightning is going to light up all the sky? Does it surprise you? It always surprises me. I mean, yeah, I know that there's thunder and I know that there's things happening. I know there's a storm going on, but I cannot pinpoint the instant at which everything's going to be lit up and I can actually see for just a second. As powerful as our brains are, as well designed as they are, that's always going to surprise us. There's always going to be this sense of wonder. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So I circled the word coming because that's, again, addressing his second question, or their second question that he's trying to answer, the coming of the Son of Man. Then verse 28, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. There's a natural tendency, right? He's describing, again, with an analogy that they know. They see vultures gather. Where do vultures gather? They gather where the dead body is. There's just these common realities of what's going to always be present. That's going to be there. So, okay, so that, I need to get through this, sorry. 24 through 15, abomination of desolation. We're going to come back to that, I promise. And then, starting in verse 29, I want us to get through this text. We have the coming of the Son of Man. Most of your translations will have this sort of sectioned off. 29 through 31. Immediately, do you suppose that's an important word to remember? Immediately, after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the power of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Okay, so which question is he trying to answer right now? That second question. We go back to our hinge verse, the coming of the Son of Man. These are the kinds of things that you will see with the coming of the Son of Man. Now, just from a language standpoint, the way that he's described that, when you add in that word immediately, it sounds a little bit more like the lightning strike to me, doesn't it? And he's going to talk about thief in the night here in a minute, but that one, to me, sounds a lot more like there's not really going to be enough indication that it's happening in a few weeks, in a few months, in a few years. It's more like, oh, this is happening now, because immediate, loud sounds, trumpets, all these kinds of things. We'll come back to that. Lesson of the fig tree, verse 32. Maybe? Okay. Things this generation will face. This is kind of the way we put it. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. Verse 32. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. Okay. You know that summer is near. Little trees, part of the reason that you can say, okay, well, the weather is changing is they put out their little buds, okay? And so they're going to start springing out, and we know that the weather is changing. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Uh-oh. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. That one can get a little confusing, so we're going to try to spend some time reconciling that. I'm already running out of time. Sorry, guys. All right, verse 36. Let's just keep going. Let's get through this. Yeah, the timing of the second coming. Okay, verse 36. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son. Right? Who's the Son? Jesus. He doesn't know. But the Father only. So this is unique knowledge. This is for your eyes only on the envelope, only God has the answer here. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. What's so interesting about Noah's days? Well, he says, for as in those days, before the flood, normal life, right? Eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. The actual day where Noah and his family get in the ark and the door is shut. Everybody's doing the normal stuff. Okay? And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Will you know? Will I know? No, I won't. No, you won't. Then 2 men will be left in the field, one will be taken, one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore, because this is going to happen this very quick, one's taken, one's stuck there, because it's going to happen quickly, therefore, stay awake. Stay awake, alert, but not alarmed. He said don't be alarmed earlier, but he says be awake. So we should be, there's a sense in which you can be awake and know that there is potential for danger, there's potential for problems, there's potential for things, and have a sort of sobriety, a sober-mindedness of your environment. Okay, I'm awake, I'm alert, I know what's happening around me, but I don't have to be in the state of fight or flight, where this could happen at any moment, and I'm in fear, constant state of fear. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? You see the difference? Okay, so there's an alertness and an awakeness that he wants in us, but not the alarmedness, the alarmed nature. Okay, therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. That word Lord can mean master, ruler, and that's exactly what he goes into next. But he says in verse 43, know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, let's say the master knew it was going to come in the first 3 or 4 hours of the night, okay, then he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. So again, in the same way that we do need to have a sobriety about things, we need to have a mental awareness about things spiritually in our daily lives, so that when Jesus comes, when Jesus, our Master, our Lord, returns, that we are found ready. We can stay awake in that sense. So again, it's not a literal, okay, I'm going to make sure that I don't sleep at any point. I take pills to keep me awake at all times. That would be ridiculous. Because we don't know when that thief is going to break in. But we can be prepared enough so that when that thief comes, we'll be ready. Therefore, you must also, verse 44, be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing. Be not hearers of the word, but doers. If we're spending our time doing, will we have to worry about when this is going to happen so much? Maybe not. Okay, so be doers, doing. Truly I say to you, verse 47, he will set him over all his possessions, this faithful servant. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, we don't know, so why do anything? And begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour he does not know, and will cut him into pieces and put him with the hypocrites in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So there's certainly a sobriety that we're looking for here. Okay, so let me do a little bit of dissection before we end this. Okay, so I got some things written down you need to hear. Sorry. The first and most immediate concern is the apparent contradiction between, and I say apparent, meaning it's not really there, but it seems like a contradiction, between what Jesus says in verses 36 through 44, what we just read, and what he said in verses 32 through 35, the whole lesson of the fig tree thing. Okay, so verse 32 through 35, from the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender, and it puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. The power of the word of God, it's eternal, right? Here he is telling them the timing of everything he has already warned them about. The false prophets, the coming tribulation, and the abomination. Okay, so chapter 24, verses 32 through 35 certainly seems to indicate two things. these things will not pass away until all things, these things will happen soon, with this generation. Okay, that's one thing that it indicates to us. These things will happen soon within this generation, the generation that Jesus is speaking to, those disciples that he's speaking to. And number two, that they will be able to see the end coming when you see these things. Okay, so all they know is this is going to happen in our generation, and we'll be able to see these things coming. Okay, verses 32 through 35. That's all we can take from that. Here, he is telling them, contrast this with chapter 24, verse 36 through 44, what we just read earlier. Notably, these phrases, concerning that day and hour, no one knows, and the phrase, you do not know on what day your Lord is coming, and the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Those three phrases, he describes the climate of the world at the second coming as at peace, normal, and very ordinary, unlike what he describes back in chapter 24, verse 4 through 28. Okay, that was chaos. That was where he's saying, do not be alarmed. But at the point when the second coming is happening, he's saying things are normal. Things are every day. They're marrying and giving in marriage. Things are just hunky-dory, so to speak. Okay? And so it seems like, okay, well, that's a contradiction. Which one is it going to be? Is the Lord coming when things are peaceful or when things are chaotic? When is he coming? Will we be able to see it coming, or will we be completely unexpected? And if all these things will take place before this generation passes away, then why hasn't he come back yet? Why are we still waiting? Because hasn't that generation died off? But remember, what question is he answering? Okay, back to 24, verse 3. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when these things will be, number one. What will be the sign of your coming, number two? And what will be the sign of the coming of the end of the age, number three? So what things were they asking about? The things he pronounced in chapter 23, specifically the persecution of the prophets and the destruction of the Jerusalem and the temple, predicted in chapter 23, verses 32 through chapter 24, 2. That's what he's talking about to answer that question. The other two questions concern timing, okay? And I think the disciples probably thought the latter two questions were actually the same thing, thinking that Jesus would return at the end of the age. But Jesus viewed them as separate questions. He dealt with them that way. The best way to explain all the content of chapter 24 and chapter 25 without the apparent contradiction that we're concerned about here with itself or the rest of Scripture is to consider the two questions about the sign of the coming and the sign of the end of the age as separate things. Okay? Jesus answers the question about the sign of the end of the age several times. I'm going to note them for you. Chapter 24, verse 8. All these things are but the beginning of the birth pains. Okay, so an indication. Then verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. That's a timing indicator, marker, whatever you want to call it. Verse 27. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man, the suddenness of it. And then verse 33. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Okay, so those are indicators. Those are attempts to answer and give some indication, at least, of the nearness of the coming of the end of the age. Okay? But the second question about the sign of his coming has a different answer. Chapter 24, 36 through 25 and verse 46. We stopped at the end of chapter 24, but he's still answering it. In chapter 25, the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and then the final judgment. Just reading those indicators. The rest of chapter 25, he's still trying to answer that second question as it relates to a discussion of the end times. Matthew 24 and 25 reinforce basically one idea. What's the one idea that's come out as clearly as possible what we read so far? We don't know. Thank you, Carmen. We don't know. We don't know. There will be no apparent signs. We have no idea when the end will come. No apparent signs. Okay, I'm going to stop. with like 1 minute. Go ahead, Grover.
They had enough time to get the Christians out of town, and then there was a short pause, then the end came. If Jesus gave them warning, why give them a warning if you don't know when it's going to be fulfilled? They had enough warning to say this is the time to get out of town. And what happened afterwards was a surprise.
And are you referring to the Jerusalem destruction? Okay, yeah. So with that first section, Jerusalem destruction, there's a warning. There's an instruction to do a specific thing, which is get out of town. And then, yeah, destruction of Jerusalem. And we're talking about AD 70. You guys can look it up in the history books. Jerusalem's destroyed. Temple's destroyed. Horrible things happen. Okay, so that's a real thing. And he's saying this is going to happen in your generation, and it did. AD 70. So this is about 40 years from the time that Jesus is talking. It happens. Most of the people he's talking to, it happens. So they get to see that. That's a clear indication. But then when it comes to the whole end of the age and the sign of the second coming, he's not nearly as specific and explicit, and he doesn't tell us to do these things. He tells us to be prepared spiritually, because you don't know the exact timing. I can't give you the exact timing of that, because he doesn't even know, does he? Remember? Okay. All right. There's more to this. Don't get angry, please. Stay calm. We're going to talk some more about it next week. And as always with me, and if you guys are so good to me, you just patiently wait for me to do my thing. I appreciate that. If you've got questions, come talk to me. Some of them I'll have answers for. Some of them I'll be like, I don't really know. I struggle with this all the time. But we'll continue to work through it as best we can. Okay?
Said, let the dead bury the dead.
Let the dead bury the dead. Rover?
When Jesus uttered those words, the New Testament hadn't even been started yet.
Yes.
So what came afterwards may have helped clarify.
Yes, exactly. So when you think about, again, the foundation that we're laying, Jesus, this is Matthew, who's writing after Jesus' ministry. He's writing after some of the letters were written, okay? And he's trying to explain this to everybody that he possibly can, the readers, which includes you and me, okay? But then, after Jesus says these things, then the early church is started, and Paul and others are writing letters to the churches. So there's all this information that we need to have in hand before we can even jump into something like Revelation. Okay? All right. I love you all. Thank you for listening. You're free to go and then come back. Don't run away.